Again, thank you everyone, whoever has joined us today. We're just going to be starting in 5 minutes. So please, stay tuned with us. Just this is quick, an information that we wanted to share from our side. And this is really hot from the oven. We're going to be launching EduTech Virtual Asia. And this is a digital conference which is going to be happening on the 23rd to the 26th of June. This is basically free for everyone to attend. You see a quick QR code there, which you can capture right now. And already register to attend the conference in June. But do not worry if you're not able to capture it. There's also a website which is called the EduTech Virtual Asia website. You can log on to the website and actually go and register yourself right away. Just to give you a quick insight on what we're going to be doing in the conference, it's a 4-day conference. And we're going to be looking at producing content for both K-12 educators and higher education educators. So the K-12 conference is going to be on the 23rd and the 24th of June, and the higher education conference is going to be on the 25th and the 26th of June. All this content is going to be online. It's going to be digital. We have people from different countries who are coming in as speakers who are going to share some important aspects on topics like remote learning, STEAM, smart campus, and of course, leadership at this time, which is very different from any other times that we've been at. So I encourage you, whoever wants to be a part of this conference, go right away and register yourself and make sure that you get a seat on this conference. Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to yet another EduTech Philippines webinar. I am Preeti, the project director for the EduTech conference and the webinar series itself. So, for all those who have been with us since 11 in the morning, thank you again, for hanging on with us and staying tuned. And we are right now all ready, to start the panel discussion. Thank you for your continued support as you've been doing on all our webinars and also the conferences that you've been attending with us. Technology is really changing the dynamics of education, and educators are beginning to rethink learning experiences. And what are the possible pitfalls that teachers and administrators need to be aware of? Because learning never stops, no matter the distance or the season, isn't it? So we've got an exciting panel here today with panelists coming in from the technology side and also the university to really talk about, how can you go virtual and how remote learning is really going to be effective for you as educators. Also, a special shout out to our partner Lenovo Philippines, who have contributed and collaborated with us on this session. Now, before I pass my time to Jamie, who is the moderator, again, a reminder and a quick housekeeping. If you have any questions, please make sure that you submit them in the Q&A tab, which is at the bottom of your screen or at the top of your screen. There'll be 15 minutes towards the end of the discussion for a live Q&A session. And lastly, we'll also be sending you out a quick survey on your email after the webinar, and we will greatly appreciate your feedback. Just a quick one on the certificates again. We will make sure that everyone who's attended the webinar today will get a certificate, but just to let you know, it takes about 7 days for us to put that together. So just wait for the email to come to you within 7 days, and if you still don't receive it, then please do write us to us, and we will make sure that you will get the certificate with you. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator, Jamie, who will be moderating this panel today for us. Over to you, Jamie.
All right, thank you so much, Preeti. That was such a fun way to start the webinar, a perfect example of how virtual sessions can be fun and engaging, but we'll get to that later. A good morning to everyone who joined in. Wow, the number is so big, and we have attendees from all over the Philippines, like Cebu, Cagayan de Oro City, Manila, we have Palawan, Pampanga, and even in Nepal and the Middle East. So good morning, everyone, and we're so happy you could join us today. By the way, I'm Jamie Fournier, a radio DJ and TV and events host, but before I went full-time in this industry, I was a trainer and instructional designer for a good 8 years. So I know how important our topic for today is, especially as we are thrust into this new direction of solely having distance education as we face the COVID-19 crisis. We are so lucky as we have a great panel with us today, from the fields of education and, of course, technology to help us navigate through discussion and also to help us cite questions we need to ask and hopefully solutions as well. Let's start off with a round of introductions from our experts from these two fields, starting off with Rich. So, Rich, over to you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Rich Henderson, the Director of Global Education Solutions for Lenovo, and I look after K-12 and higher education strategy and solutions for Lenovo globally. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much, Rich. From the Academe, we have from De La Salle, once again, Paul.
Hi, hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Paul, and I am currently the Director of the Center for Innovative Learning Programs of De La Salle University, Dasmariñas. Basically, we are in charge of our learning management system and make sure that e-learning, and that learning never stops during this time.
Indeed, Paul, we're so excited to learn from you and to know what you are doing in your institution right now with the changes in place. Now, we also have Delia, who has extensive experience in both education and being a solution provider in technology. So Delia, over to you.
Good morning. Hi, I'm Delia DeCourcy. I'm a solutions manager on the Lenovo Education Worldwide team. And in my previous life, I was an educator for 25 years in middle school, high school, and also taught at the university level. So excited to talk with everyone today about educational technology.
That's great to know, Delia. We can definitely learn from you, especially because you have emergence of two different fields, and we can really take note of what you can provide as solutions for what we're facing right now. And speaking of solutions, we also have Paolo with us as a part of our panel. So Paolo, your turn.
Hello, hi everyone. Good morning. My name is Paolo Balinas, Pao for short. I've been with Microsoft Education for more than 5 years now. So what I do is really work with schools in terms of understanding their needs, their requirements, and how Microsoft can support from a technology standpoint. So I'm very much excited to share the different insights of how Microsoft is actually helping schools, especially during this time.
Thank you, Paolo. Thank you so much for that. You know, more than ever, the limelight is really on what you do right now. So a lot of the educators who are with us in this webinar are excited to find out how we can take full advantage of technology. This goes out to Rich and Delia, of course, as well. But let's start with this new reality. Let's understand it together and see if we're on the same page. So I'll turn it over to Paul once again to start our discussion. But before I do that, just a reminder, as Preeti said earlier, this discussion is yours as well. So do take advantage of the question button and send in your questions as I will address them either during the discussion or during the Q&A segment that we have later on. So Paul, understanding this new reality, you know, this is something that I have to admit we were not fully prepared for with the lockdown in Manila in place and in the Philippines in place since March, with a targeted face-to-face learning set tentatively in August. What changes have you had to go through, and your institution as well, with the COVID-19 crisis?
Well, to understand where I am coming from, before the pandemic has affected the Philippines, our university have been delivering blended classes. Before suspension, we are about 25 to 30% of the classes are blended. So naturally, when the pandemic hit, these are the most ready. So now the problem goes to the rest of the 70%. What are we going to do with them? So there have been a lot of changes, and some of the changes were very drastic. There were changes in policies. We had a change of office operations, not only for the academics, but also in research and finance and other units of the university. There had to be some changes in the pedagogy as well. And our office, who's in charge of the e-learning, had to change. In fact, we have to change about 4 times because it all depends on the need of the students, the faculty, and the community.
Exactly. These changes, you know, from 25% to 100%, suddenly it's all distance education. And this job falls on your team. So you mentioned that you had to go through 4 changes. Would you mind sharing the process that you and your team had to go through? As I know a lot of the educators can relate to this as well.
Sure. Before our office is in charge of the learning management system, many are still not using the learning management system, or they may be using it, but only for a very limited engagement. So during the first 2 weeks, essentially the entire team had to be technical support because there are a lot of accounts that has to be activated, has to be created. Then the second wave, we noticed during the third week after the suspension, there's no more technical support questions. So and we're on duty, and we're telling ourselves we have to make use of our time. So we made use of that time to train the faculty in technical matters. So we equipped them. And then afterwards, the next wave is about training, monitoring. We have to monitor whether they are using what we are training them to do. Of course, we have to act also as pedagogical support. That's very important. Aside from technical support, there needs to be a support in the pedagogy as well. And then the last one, since I call it the acceptance stage, since this is going to be the new normal, all departments now are requesting training for the EdTech use. So now we are overloaded. The entire month of June, we have overloaded the schedule of training for all the units within the university.
And you know what, Paul, I agree with you. It definitely does not end there, the journey. You've had such a long journey in terms of adapting to the change. And I think your institution is doing well, but there's more to do as well, as you mentioned. And I could hear certain challenges that you have had to go through. And I'm going to turn this question over to Delia, as she has had experience for 25 years in the educational field and also in providing solutions for technology. So Delia, may I know what you think the challenges are for learners as well and educators as we face this global pandemic?
Well, so Paul addressed a lot of the technological challenges, and of course there are significant pedagogical challenges for the teachers and the professors. I think on the sort of human side of learning, when we think about the social aspects of learning, what's really challenging right now for learners, whether they're in K-12 or university, is feeling connected, because it's tough to do that when you're working through video conferencing and learning management systems alone. So feeling really connected, not just with their professors, but also with other students. So thinking about how to create opportunities for that kind of connection, not just about the coursework, but even just, you know, everyday life and the challenges that they're facing with the pandemic and the quarantine. Is really critical so that they feel that sense of engagement, because learning is inherently social, and it's important that we continue to make it social while we are living through this strange time. And that can be very challenging for teachers, for instructors, if they haven't had to do that in a blended or distance learning scenario.
Yes, I agree. I mean, good with Paul and his institution, they had 25% in place already, but what about those who had to go from 0 to 100%? And it's great, Delia, because you mentioned the learners as well. This has to be engaging for them. And we're going to touch on that later on and talk about how virtual classes can still be engaging and can still be effective. But more than ever, technology is placed in the limelight in distance education. How do you think this comes into play, Rich?
Well, as I think about distance learning, and I think Paul really nailed it, it's not new. We've been doing this in a hybrid or a blended learning environment for many years, but to go from 25% to full on does require some additional technology resources. And I tend to think about 3 specific resources that educators and IT should think about. One is cybersecurity. Making sure that the students are safe and the device platforms that they're on are safe for the students to use, and we're providing secure devices. That's been a big focus for Lenovo, is focused on that cybersecurity solution. A second one is remote device management. So if these are devices that are deployed by the school, by the university, managing those devices and making sure that they're staying up to date, and they can have either asynchronous or synchronous class sessions that are being managed is something that is really key. And then the third, after you kind of check those 2 boxes, the third thing is really around instructional resources and tying those class experiences to meaningful learning outcomes, so that we're not just doing online worksheets, but we're doing thoughtful process dialogue with our colleagues and with our fellow students.
So much is left to be considered now that we have solely distance education in place. And you mentioned a lot of things like considering cybersecurity for our learners and also our teachers, educators. And you mentioned picking the right device and the right applications and platforms to make sure that learning is still meaningful and effective. Now, speaking of learning being meaningful and effective, a lot of the educators here, I was running through some of their questions earlier, and a lot of them are not used to video conferencing or using these platforms. And then all of a sudden, they are forced to toggle between so many different applications, and they are forced to use these for their lesson plans. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Paulo now. Paulo, for these educators, how can we make their lives easier? How can we help them in terms of limiting these online platforms from many to a few or even just to one? Is this even possible, Paulo?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Jamie. I think you raised a very valid point because in terms of implementing remote learning or distance learning strategies, very easy to say, but when you actually try to implement it in your own respective schools, it may be quite challenging. So whenever I talk to schools, it's not just simply about choosing the right platform, but really understanding what's the outcome that you want to achieve as a school, and from the different technology platforms out there, what would be the best solution that would help me achieve those outcomes. So I love the discussion about earlier in terms of, how can educators manage the multiple options out there, and how can you actually help accelerate the learning curve. So from a technology standpoint, despite the multiple applications out there, educators must start, of course, with having a growth mindset in terms of having the willingness to adapt new technologies, and actually, understanding in a phased approach. The problem that I see that most schools try to do is to start right away from the advanced techniques. So basically, they could start from the very basics of, the fundamentals of hosting a virtual class. And in terms of the strategies or the programs that Microsoft is doing, we have actually made these technologies available to schools free of use, from virtual classes creation to engaging with students to creating assignment and homework. So we made the platform available, but at the same time, we also have a lot of training programs that we make available to schools for free. We go to the school level, we conduct online virtual sessions on how to walk them through the technology, how they can actually use it uh, in their classroom to conduct remote learning sessions.
Okay, you mentioned that you go to schools, Paulo. Now, with the quarantine in place and the lockdown in place, how are you able to still continue to do this, especially at this time when educators need it the most?
So great question. So one great example is what we're doing now. We're using Microsoft Teams Live. So what we do is we schedule meetings for schools to have virtual sessions, and we can walk through, the entire platform as if we were face to face. So we could do a screen share, do a demonstration, and a live demonstration on how they can actually use and leverage our technologies. So technology is the enabler for us to still continue learning despite the current crisis that we're in, and how education can continue beyond the four walls of the classroom.
Exactly. Like Preeti said earlier, learning knows no season or distance. So it is essential that we still continue to equip our learners out there despite the COVID-19 crisis. And I'm seeing questions here that are relevant to our discussion right now. And let's go back to the basics. Paulo, you were talking about the basics earlier. Don't overwhelm yourself. Start from the beginning and learn from there. Just like Paul was saying, they went through a process in equipping themselves with what they need for their distance education. Now, I'm seeing educators here ask questions like, what is distance education anyway? So let's start with that basic question, Paul, and then let's talk about the pros and cons for you as an educator in delivering classes virtually. So Paul, over to you.
Distance learning basically is defined by the Commission on Higher Education. It's a combination of it's a non-formal learning where learning can be delivered via online. Again, online is one option, or you can deliver it in a non-online mode like giving of modules. In fact, when we did a survey after the after the suspension, we found out that about 70% of the students have connectivity in the internet, and there are 30% who does not. So what we did was, it's a double work for teachers. They have to account for students who cannot connect to the internet, and then they have to also account for the 70% who can. So the teachers have to do a module where some teachers have actually opted to deliver them via courier to the homes of the students, while those who can connect use various platforms, and that's where our office comes in to train them on how to deliver the online learning.
That's a very good point, because in the Philippines, internet connectivity is not universal. Even if 70% of us have it, it is not exactly the best connection. So Delia, with this situation in mind, in the Philippines specifically, what can we do? What solution can we have for those who do not have internet connections at home, for learners, and also even for educators?
Yeah, it's a great question. And here in the United States, we face a similar issue. And it's something that I have thought a fair amount about. How do we connect with our students as educators when they don't have an internet connection? So I do understand that in the Philippines, there is significant penetration in mobile devices. And so that's a great option. Fortunately, we have platforms like Microsoft Teams that have wonderful mobile apps. And so you can actually push content out to students that way, and they can access it. And you can also use the video conferencing on the mobile app, which I myself do frequently. And frankly, this is the video generation. So another Microsoft product that I'm a huge fan of is Flipgrid, and it has a wonderful mobile app. And so that is a phenomenal and free way for students to connect to each other in a community. So you can have a classroom community on Flipgrid, or even connect to a broader community, and that includes higher education. So I think going the video route, and also thinking about audio. I mean, students can easily record audio and submit responses that way using a mobile phone. So it is a question of how much data they are able to use, but it is a way to be both synchronously and asynchronously connected in a time when it can be challenging due to Wi-Fi access.
Yeah, that's great to know. Flipgrid, if anyone wants to know more about that, you can take note of that and look it up later on. But other than Flipgrid, what other apps? We have a question here, Delia. They're asking what other apps can be used, offline apps, to facilitate virtual classes.
Offline apps to facilitate virtual classes. I might have to flip that question over to Paolo.
Yes.
Paolo, do you have any thoughts, Paolo, for offline apps?
So in terms of the offline apps, although it's not yet announced, no, we're in the works. Microsoft has recognized the challenge in terms of gaining access to internet connectivity. So we're in the works in developing certain offline capabilities. But top of mind, for example, a simple app of PowerPoint. What the teacher can actually do is record the entire PowerPoint presentation, and perhaps have a video on the side, and save it as an MP4 file, which students can simply view at their own pace. So there are multiple solutions to solve the internet connectivity issue, but that's one idea that I've seen schools have successfully done. Teachers recording their PowerPoint presentation in advance and providing it to their students to review offline.
You know, I personally know educators who are doing this. They're both blending synchronous learning and also asynchronous learning, as well. As you know, we can't be solely dependent on having both learners and educators online, especially with the internet connection level here in the Philippines. Now, a lot of the educators now are asking about how to make things more interactive. And I know we talked about ways on how we can do that. But one important question here is, as Rich said earlier, we have to make sure it's still meaningful and engaging for everybody. So Paul, what advice can you give to the educators all over the Philippines, the Middle East, and also Southeast Asia on how to make these lessons still interactive? One question here is very interesting. How can I make my pupils listen to my topic?
Okay, I'll just share some of the examples that we are doing in our school, but
Yes,
this is not
please.
the totality. Of course, the role of videos and online live sessions is very important. In fact, we've been a big fan of Microsoft Teams. We've been using it even before the pandemic. Yes, and the good thing about that is we have subscribed to Office 365, our school. So all the videos are recorded in automatically in Microsoft Stream. So for those students who weren't able to connect, they'll just visit Stream to revisit the previous lessons that were discussed and recorded online. So that's the first videos. And then we have also equipped the faculty to gamify their lessons. So we have discussed a lot of gamification features. We discussed the use of several apps for them to use in their class. And also, our training in the use of our learning management system is also gamified. Teachers get badges, certificates, and points every time they finish an online course. And then we have also conducted virtual tours. We can do that. We have partners, universities all over the world, and they have shown that they were able to visit some countries in Africa, some of them in Malaysia, some of them has visited in UK. And in Mexico, these are partner schools. It has to be planned by the teacher, and of course, you need to have an online platform to do that. But of course, last and definitely not the least, the office. There needs to be a person or an office in charge of monitoring this. Because otherwise, if they don't get recognized, I don't think they will have anything. They will not be engaged. So we monitor them. We have a scoring mechanism that every time a faculty use a certain feature or a certain app where we have subscribed institutionally, we give them score, and they need to maintain a certain score. That is to ensure also that they are delivering quality online teaching. So yeah, we also award teachers. Yeah, the best Flipgrid users, the best Microsoft, the most active Microsoft Team users. We award them like something like that.
It sounds like even for educators, it's a fun experience. It's definitely, it boils down to the perspective of the educators as well and how they can see this new challenge for them. You mentioned certain applications, online platforms that your team has chosen in the face of this pandemic. Now, Rich, what support can we give the educators? Paolo was saying earlier, there's work in progress. It's great to know that this tech giant is still working on ways to give the best devices out there for our educators and learners. For you and your team, what support can you give to these educators and also the learners to empower them in distance education?
Yeah, there's a number of tools that are available, but I do want to address something that I've seen in the comments around how do parents feel safe about using these devices, concerns about screen time, concerns about how to really connect these students if they're in an offline environment or lacking internet connection. And one of the best practices that we've seen, and I would recommend this for the Philippines, is to have some designated office hours, both for administrators to talk to faculty, to collaborate, to discuss some of the challenges and how to resolve and share best practices among the teaching faculty, as well as for parents and students to connect with faculty. I mean, one of the key factors here is flexibility. So it's not a one-size-fits-all model. You need, as we've discussed, you need asynchronous opportunities to meet as a class, as well as synchronous activities to meet as a class, as well as asynchronous times. But if you have some set hours that students can connect with their faculty, or administration can connect with their faculty, and those are kind of like office hours that could be an open video chat that people could join, or a text chat, or anything that kind of makes those office hours accessible to share best practices and give support out to the educators.
You know, you make a very good point there, Rich, because let's be practical. Certain parents are receptive of this new system in place, and others need convincing. Others are doubtful of what it can deliver and how we can move forward. So it's good to know that these are ways that teachers and parents can partner as well in order for this to be effective. So thank you for that, Rich. What can we expect from your team and your company in the coming months? As you know, even in the Philippines, Rich, the tentative face-to-face learning is to resume towards the latter part of August. But again, tentative is the word we need to take note of with the rising numbers of cases here that is yet to be confirmed. So in the coming months, what solutions can we expect, similar to what Paolo has mentioned earlier on for his team?
Yeah, so we've developed a distance learning portfolio that will be available on all of your Lenovo devices, and that includes everything from device management to instructional resources, as well as great content that is specific and mapped to education needs and curriculum in the Philippines. So that should be made available by the end of the summer, around the same timeline, and we're excited for that. We're also working on virtual reality classroom opportunities. So if we're back in a classroom setting, we know probably travel will be restricted. We have had some requests for more of a virtual reality experience where students can do a virtual tour of a different country, of job opportunities, job potential. So VR is still a technology that can be used to extend students' vision into other parts of the world.
That's very interesting. I'm excited. I think I want to be a student once again with all that in place. Again, it's very engaging for the students. And Paul is smiling. Now, Paul, we have educators you're asking. I know De La Salle is fully equipped with what they need in order to move forward, but we have educators you're asking, what about those who are having challenges in terms of considering the cost and considering the resources that they have? What can you give as advice to these educators in still delivering what they need to deliver as educators in the systems?
Since it's actually also a problem for even for a school like De La Salle, budget is also always, I think, the number one consideration in whatever tools that we're going to use. I think there are a lot of educational tools that are free right now, and they have to invest. First of all, they have to establish a team. If they don't have yet a team, an office that handles this, that has to be done. And the next is to roll out. There has to be a policy in place by the higher level management that recognizes that we have to shift. We need to have a team who will focus on this, and then the needs analysis will be based on what do we need and what available technology do we have. There are a lot of free technologies. Microsoft Teams is free. There are a lot of tools out there that can be used by, freely. Then the school needs to develop a training plan, and it has to roll out as soon as possible, so that by the time the next school year comes, the school is already prepared.
Exactly, and you're already talking about the next school year. We're going to touch on that later in terms of how this whole situation is affecting the future of education. But before that, you mentioned needs analysis. You mentioned the need to choose the right platform. And as you mentioned, there's so many free online platforms out there. And speaking of free online platforms, Paolo, I know that what we're using now is free. Could you share more about the features of this platform? And a lot of educators are also asking here, how long is it going to be free? How long can we use this for our classes? Can you shed some light on this, Paolo, please?
Thanks for the question. So a lot of schools ever since, because of the crisis, have started to reach out to technology companies such as Microsoft. And little did they know that actually our Microsoft Teams or Office 365 suite has been free ever since we launched our Office 365 package. So just because of this pandemic, we started to have widespread in terms of the awareness of the tools that they're looking for that can help them conduct remote learning sessions. So in terms of the availability, there's no expiration, there's no cost, and there's no commitment to avail of Microsoft Teams. In terms of the applications in the school or the classroom, I think Paul did a great job in terms of highlighting a few of the features, but more on, how can we conduct a synchronous section wherein we conduct a live class. I'm a teacher, I hold the class, and students simply join in, or I can also record the entire session for later consumption of the students. Other use case scenarios is, being able to share files, edit documents together, grade and assess students. And it's basically like, think of Teams as a one hub that host everything, and at the same time, we can also integrate with a lot of third-party applications. Of third-party applications from gamification apps like Kahoot and other third-party apps. So again, Microsoft Teams is free. It's there to support schools' remote learning needs. They could simply do that by logging into aka.ms slash office education to
Can
avail
you
that
can you
free.
say that again, just so they can all take note of it? Once again, what they log on to avail of
You
it?
could just log on to the website, aka.ms slash
Mhm.
office education. I'll chat it in the discussion box,
Wonderful.
avail of that free offer. And again, there's no commitment, no expiration. It's free for use for schools to support their remote learning.
Great. Thank you so much, Paolo. Now, while Paolo's talking, I could take note of the need for having synchronous and asynchronous lessons in place to make it effective. Now, Delia, for someone who's had extensive experience again in education, can you please touch on these two different ways of learning? And for you, what do you think are the best practices in moving forward? Is it a blend of both? Do you suggest having more of an asynchronous approach to distance education? What are your thoughts, Delia?
Well, I think it does really depend on the situation. Of course, you're going to have larger lecture classes at the university level, and those can be synchronous. And you can use polling apps like Poll Everywhere to actually engage students while the live lecture is going on. Or alternatively, you can make that a more asynchronous experience where students are watching a video of the lecture and then spend the time synchronously, because it's now freed up since they've already watched the lecture, to do breakout rooms, smaller group discussions. So, it depends on what the teacher's goals are. But having done distance learning with middle schoolers and high schoolers and college students, I can say partially it also depends on the age of the student and what they are able to do. So with younger students, you might have limited time synchronously in terms of working on learning goals, and they're off doing some learning on their own. But then, with older students, they're capable of doing so much independently, and they can do that in a collaborative setting. So for example, Microsoft Teams has a fabulous collaboration space. So you can use synchronous class time to make that kind of work happen. And we were talking earlier about engagement and making lessons interactive. The more student-centered and student-led your lessons are, the more engaged students are going to be. So the teacher who was concerned about getting the students to listen to the topics, when students are sometimes the ones delivering information to other students on those topics, they're more likely to listen. So all of that can happen synchronously as well.
Okay, so main point is really to make sure it's student driven specifically. Now, if you were to zoom in on higher education, Delia, you said you have experience in this. What are your best practices for those who are teaching higher education right now? How can they make it effective for their learners?
I think Rich was talking earlier about how we can support our educators. For so many in higher ed, the shift to distance learning was just out of the blue. And Paul has talked about the challenges of that. And I think it's really critical that in addition to providing strong training, that we have professors focus on what their strengths are. So if they're excellent at facilitating discussions, how can we support them in doing that? In a distance learning fashion, because you can absolutely still do all of those things. So that's an important best practice. Still play to your strengths.
Okay.
And yeah, that's a critical first step, I would say.
Thank you for sharing your best practices, Delia. Now, Paul, Delia mentioned certain activities there that still need to be done. What about the hands-on physical activities that still need to be administered, still need to be learned, like lab activities. What are you doing? What's your institution doing in order to still deliver the lessons for these lab activities and other physical activities that need to be in place?
That's actually a problem. Even we are trying to solve. Not all of the laboratories that we have been transformed online into distance learning. So there are really those laboratories like in chemistry and in other types of laboratory where students will have to come by batch to the school, and our school calendar is not yet finished now. So we are following the late calendar opening. So we're not yet finished. For those, for some programs like computer, they were able to solve this problem because essentially a computer laboratory needs only the computer itself and a program.
Yep.
So we were able to troubleshoot this. But then again, right now we are on talks with some of the app developers with regards to developing the application needed for laboratory. So these are actually not handled by our office anymore. This is handled by the respective departments and program heads to transform their laboratory next school year to become online as well.
Okay, so that's a continuous challenge for teams like yours, Paul, as I hear from your answer. Now, Paolo, hearing that as a technology solutions provider, can you share with us what can be done? I know your team is working on a lot of things to still provide in terms of these learning experiences. So is there anything that we educators can look forward to when it comes to activities like this?
Yeah, so from a technology standpoint, I think it further enhances the learning experience. So I'd like to touch on the example that Paul gave, like for example, chemistry. What educators that I have seen done in recreating the learning experience is, for example, some schools have decided to adapt or use Minecraft
Okay.
to conduct game-based learning. So instead of having to memorize a periodic table, the learning experience is better because within the game, teachers can actually assign students to create water. So within the game, they needed to mix chemical compounds of hydrogen and oxygen to move to the next step. So these solutions like this, like Minecraft, game-based learning, is a new way that we can actually conduct the learning experience or enhance the learning experience for students to make it more immersive and to tap into the different learning modalities of the student, from visual learners, auditory learners, even kinesthetic learners. So technology can actually serve as an enabler to help enhance that experience.
I definitely agree. Now, what lessons from the coronavirus pandemic do you think will shape the future of education? Because you're talking a lot about gamifying learning experiences and making it very interesting for our learners. So, it's tentative, everything, the new normal. This is the new reality. This is what's in place right now. So how do you think this will shape the future of education, specifically in the Philippines, Paolo?
I think, being in the education space for more than 5 years now, I get to talk to a lot of teachers, and a lot of them seem to agree that we will no longer go back to the old way of doing things. And this is starting to shape or to become our new normal. So a lot of schools who were quite hesitant in terms of adapting cloud technologies are suddenly finding the need to actually look into these technologies because of business continuity on how we could actually use technology as a tool conduct remote learning beyond the four walls. So I think schools are already starting to, incorporate the use of technology into their classroom. And I'm quite excited because of the initiatives that Microsoft is doing together with our technology partners like Lenovo and whatnot to actually support schools for making this happen. So yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a new reality. It isn't going away anytime soon. And with that said, Rich, we talked about us being caught off guard with the new direction of doing solely distance education. Now, based on what happened, based on this new reality, what can institutions and the faculties in these institutions take now in order to be able to be fully prepared for anything in the future? This happened now, we weren't prepared, but what can they do moving forward to be fully prepared? for situations such as this?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jamie. I would say that there are a number of different new technologies that are really shaping our education experience in our classrooms.
Mm-hmm.
And distance learning is one, but there are others like AI, like smart connected devices and voice-enabled devices. Soon we'll have 5G. Soon we'll have cloud at the edge. So technology will continue to evolve. I think the key is to provide to begin practicing these technologies in an environment that lets schools prepare. One of the best examples of this that I've seen is working with schools around the world that had digital learning days, for example. So even though they were in a traditional classroom setting, they had days that were just remote, and they did fully online learning as a model to test that, test the strength of their internet, test their device capabilities, test their platforms and their LMS structure and their instructional models. And then those schools, when the pandemic hit, were able to immediately turn to a fully online distance learning model because they had been practicing that technology. So for me, it's looking at the new technologies as they're evolving, finding ways to use those in our classrooms to begin to enable teachers, faculty, IT to use that technology and put it into a practice scenario.
I'm hopeful that this is something that the institutions have in place and are working on so that they can be prepared for anything in the future. I mean, if we survive this, I'm sure the future is bright for education. Now, another perspective I'd like to look into is a lot of us are talking about the challenges for the learners and the educators, but to see the bright side of things, Delia, how do you think this could be helpful for the learners out there to prepare them for the workforce, especially for those in higher education?
Well, I think so many of the skills that they have to engage when they're learning remotely, when it comes to using all the platforms, the technology, those obviously are ones that will be valuable in the workforce. But then there's all those soft skills, like figuring out how to solve a problem when you don't have your teacher right in front of you, or communication and collaboration with other students when you're working on projects, and doing all of that at a distance, because the world is more connected than it ever has before. And I'm talking with people on multiple continents every day, right? So we have to know how to do that, what technology to use to do that. So it's a great opportunity. But I think also this time gives us a look into the future in terms of equity and access to higher education, and the possibility that as higher education moves to be more remote, and potentially lower cost, is it possible that more students will be able to get degrees than ever before? And that will help us prepare this global workforce that we need. Yeah.
Okay, now I as much as I'd like to hoard all the questions for this discussion, unfortunately, we've hit the 45-minute mark, so I have to share the floor with all of our attendees from all over the Philippines, Nepal, the Middle East. I'm going to read some of the questions that they sent. Feel free to still send in some questions by hitting the questions button, and we'll address them right now as we are now going to move on to the Q&A segment. So let's start off with this question. We have here, do you have recommendations or suggestions with regard to the mechanisms that educators should go about in validating assessments? That's a good point, from students, especially in these trying times that we gear towards virtual learning. So Paul, in terms of assessments, what are the systems you have in place, and what can you suggest for this educator who sent in this question? Kennedy, Ganon.
Yeah. So actually, the problem here is if we treat the online learning the same way as we treat our face-to-face learning when we give quiz, especially for quizzes. That's the number one problem, because we had an institutional policy where the quizzes has to be taken in unlimited attempts That is in consideration for those who have slow internet and for those who don't have regular internet connections. And it has to have at least 1 week duration. So now we were bombarded by faculty who says that this is not possible. So we have to teach them. If you have learning management systems, if you have other systems, use question banks. You can use question banks, and then the unlimited attempt, as many questions as possible. Then you just give them bits and pieces of quizzes. Like, for example, you have 100 sets of questions, then you only give them 10 to 15 at one time. That will ensure that it's more work for teacher, but that will ensure that it will solve the cheating problem. Yes, something like that. And of course, the entire university is also encouraged to deliver an assessment that is reality based, that is not quiz type, that's not objective type, and as much as possible, it should be related to what we are going through right now in the pandemic. So we're seeing people, faculty who's crediting the acts done by the students and their family in helping the community. That's actually credited by some of the subjects. So the challenge now is to relate what we are going through in the environment right now. And I think that's the purpose of learning. You have the technical aspect and also the social aspect as well.
Hey, Jamie, we can't hear you.
You're muted.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So thank you for that, Rich. We have another question here, by the way. Thank you, Paul and Kennedy. I hope that answered your question. I'm going to address this to Rich, as he talked about this earlier on when he answered one of my questions. As educators, how do we protect our instructional materials from getting accessed by others or pirated by other teachers? You talked about cybersecurity earlier, Rich, if I'm not mistaken. So what can you share when it comes to making sure everything is secure?
Yeah, frankly, what I would recommend is leveraging a strong content management system, like Teams, for example, is a great platform where teachers can publish content that is specific to their class. You can make that available across teams that can be other faculty members, where you're sharing that internally. But that's in a protected environment that is not accessible by on the general internet. So, a lot of practice has been to kind of post things online in these open websites, and we're seeing it move now to more of these platform environments where the universities can protect their information and faculty research, but it's easily distributed to students.
Thank you for those tips, Rich. We have another important question here, specifically for Microsoft. So for Paolo, we are currently using G Suite apps in our online teaching, but we're still looking for alternatives. Are there Microsoft counterparts for this for education? So Paolo, over to you.
Yeah, so thanks for the question. So in terms of the application that you're currently using, I think the closest that Microsoft has is definitely Microsoft Teams. It's a one-stop shop that a school can actually use to host virtual classes, conduct quizzes, to engage with their students, and even conduct assessments and quizzes. So I like the discussion about Paul raised earlier in terms of we need to rethink the way we actually do assessments for students. If we were to do the same thing of having exams, for example, and having to check whether or not they got it right, I think it's about time for us to rethink that. So what I see schools start to do is actually come up with innovative ways of how they can check whether or not a student is actually learning. So one example is, you could possibly ask them to submit a video reflection of a certain subject, and from there you could actually assess the learning comprehension. So in terms of the tools, there are a lot of tools out there, and Microsoft Teams is maybe the platform that you could also look into.
It's a great platform to explore for them. And again, I just want to take note of the fact that it's for free indefinitely. So thank you for sharing the features, Paolo. Paul, I want to address this question to Paul and Delia as people with experience in education. How many hours should be allotted to online learning? Should it be the same with physical classes? That's a very good question. I myself would love to know, because earlier we talked about screen time as well. What is the appropriate number of hours? Is it similar to physical learning as well? Let's start off with Paul.
Okay, we have to understand that since we are doing a transition from our regular learning, most of us are not yet used to transforming our class because we are caught off guard. So definitely the online version of a class lecture and even making an assessment will be much harder. So that's why in our university we have instituted a policy that for all synchronous classes, it has to be done within the schedule in the registration form of the student. You cannot do it outside of the schedule. Another is the assessment of the assessment. There should only be one scheduled lesson and assessment per week. Okay, that's also a help for the teachers because they'll be doing a lot. They'll be checking a lot because we are requiring them to give feedback. And if you post a lot of assessments, then it's not only hard for the students but also for the faculty as well.
So one schedule and one assessment.
Yes.
For the week.
That's for our university.
For your university. Yeah. What number of hours would one schedule pertain to, Paul, just to have an idea?
The online session usually lasts around 1.5 hours. 1 to 1.5 hours. That's the synchronous session.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Now, Delia, I know your main focus now is providing solutions as a part of a tech giant company, but based on your experience as an educator for 25 years, what would your answer be for that? What is the allotted time needed for higher education specifically?
Sure. Well, I think about, say, a 4-hour class, right? You're getting 4 credits for it. And the assumption is that you're probably doing 4 hours of face-to-face time. I can't imagine doing 4 hours of synchronous time. That's not a best practice, right? So
especially
I understand
with internet connection.
Right. So I can understand for Paul's institution, they are setting up policies so that there is clear accountability and expectations, and students are getting similar experiences. I think as institutions and professors become more comfortable in this space, you want to think about the multiplicity of experiences that you're giving students. So how much time are you spending on lecture? How much office hours are you providing? As Rich pointed out earlier, how important that one-on-one is. Do you have discussion sections that are virtual that your TA can provide and support? And how much student collaboration time is happening in small groups? So think about how you're chunking the time and giving students a variety of experiences that will really enrich their education online.
Okay, so again, it's really understanding the need and the learners, making it centric to them. Thank you for that, Delia. I'm gonna ask Paul this question over here. When it comes to the subject that focuses on skills development, a lot of practical questions here, Paul. How can this be done despite distance learning, considering the resources of both the teacher and the students as well? I think a lot of them are unified in saying resources are not universal. It is a bit of a challenge in the Philippines. So what can you give us advice for this group of educators?
First, the role of ensuring that we deliver the quality, whether it's a lecture subject or a laboratory subject, or whether it's a physical education subject, a field subject like OJT, it is not the sole responsibility of the faculty and the EdTech office. It's the entire university has to have a concerted effort. That's why there needs to be a regular meeting with among the stakeholders within the university, involve the students and even the parents, on how we can go about propose certain solutions. Because certainly, even for us, often we are surprised with what the faculty and some of the stakeholders suggest what we do. So we once the suggestions come in, we analyze them based on the needs, and we usually go back to the learning outcomes of the students. Are we going to hit this learning outcomes with this application, with this tool that we're going to use, with this modality that we're going to adapt to teach the students? Then if it does, then we adapt them, we train them, we give them support, and we monitor them on how we use them. So basically, there's a lot of discipline out there. Like we have, aside from the sciences, we have kitchen for culinary, we have problems for engineering, their laboratory as well. So yeah, right now we are on this phase of transforming and planning towards transitioning towards delivering everything online. for
You
next semester. Yeah, the entire school is
okay?
on board with this, and it has to be the same thing with other institutions as well.
You know, you bring a very good point in involving parents as well, because they're a big part of this equation. And we have a question here from Cornelia Pitos, asking if parents should also undergo training. Now, Rich also mentioned earlier, parents are involved in the process. So what's your take on this, Paul? Should they undergo trainings to help their pupils at home?
Definitely. Yeah, we agree. In fact, we are drafting right now our revised organizational chart for our office, because we're assigning one parent connect coordinator. Somebody has to also connect with the parents. The good thing about the learning management system that we have right now is that we can create parent accounts so they can monitor the students' performance. They can get involved as well. They can view whatever announcements that we have, whatever things that is being done in school. So it's
Okay.
very important. Yes, parents should be involved as well.
Now, just to wrap it up, thank you so much for that advice, Paul. Now I'm going to turn it over to Paolo to just share with us how this approach can aid in deeper learning today and even in the future as it changes the new reality of education. So, Paolo, how can it help and support deeper learning for our learners?
You're referring to the remote learning or the parents being involved?
The whole process of distance education, remote learning, making it more practical, and everything that we've discussed so far. With this new reality, how can technology support deeper learning moving
Yeah,
forward?
I think great question, right? So basically, the good thing about technology is we are able to tap into the different learning modalities of students. In the past, there was a one size fits all strategy of teaching students, wherein the teacher is the main source of knowledge.
Mhm.
Nowadays, with technology, we could provide videos, for example, for the more visual learners, provide audiobooks perhaps for the more auditory learners, and even actually assigning tasks for the kinesthetic learners to learn. So technology
Okay.
serves as an enabler for a deeper comprehension, a faster, accelerated learning process of a student. So it's quite exciting to see what technology has in place. And another great example is being able to customize or personalize the learning of the students. So they can actually chart their own path in terms of what careers that they wanted to have in the future, and at the same time, undergo certain micro courses that can have them gain those certain skill sets. And technology plays an integral role of reshaping or enabling that to happen in the future. So yeah, I'm excited to see how education will look like in this new normal.
Mhm.
And being a technology provider, we're excited to actually uh, work as an enabler and work with schools in making that happen.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Paul. Definitely technology is in the limelight, and it's exciting to know that there are so many resources out there available. I hope this has been an insightful discussion for all our attendees. Thank you to the panelists for shedding some light on the questions asked. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Preeti as we've hit the 45-minute mark, or actually the 1 hour mark. So Preeti, over to you.
Pretty, you're on mute.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much, panelists and Jamie, for moderating the session, so beautifully. Just on a quick note, if you really like to know anything more about Lenovo or Microsoft, solutions, you can probably reach out to Richard, Delia, or Paolo directly. If I can ask you guys to, put in your contact details in that Q&A button so that people can take advantage of those connections and get back to you if they have any sort of further questions. I really enjoyed myself a lot, and I hope all of you attendees have had something substantial to learn as well. I'd also like to thank our partner today, Lenovo Philippines and Microsoft, to be a part of this webinar today. As mentioned earlier, we'd love your feedback. So here's a quick QR code for the survey. Don't worry if you have not been able to catch it. We'll be sending you an email right after the webinar. And so please do give us some feedback. We'll really appreciate that. Again, on the question of certificates, we are going to send you the certificates for this webinar. Whoever has attended today and is been with us, we just need about 7 days to process it. So just make sure that you keep an eye on the email that you'll get with the certificates for this webinar today. I'm going to quickly also share our lineup for next week, and please make sure that you reserve your spot because there are only very few virtual seats remaining. This one, yes, has been very popular, again, in collaboration with Lenovo, that we're going to run on Tuesday. So whoever is here with us today and signed up for the session on Tuesday as well, we really look forward to seeing you. And on the next front, as I mentioned again, when we were waiting on to log on, EduTech has launched a virtual conference in June. That's going to be happening between the 23rd and the 26th of June. You can either use the QR code here to proceed with your registration. It's free to attend over all the 4 days. Or you can also go to our website, which is EduTechAsia Virtual, and process your registrations there. We're going to be looking at 2 days of K-12 and 2 days of higher ed. So 2 days of K-12 would be 23rd and 24th of June, and higher ed would be 25th and 26th of June. So with that, we've come to the end of this. Again, thank you all of the panelists and the attendees for joining us today. Take care and please be safe and healthy. So signing off from EduTech. Bye.
Bye.